Well, the world is sliding into chaos. Trade wars, military buildups, talk of World War III. In Germany, you won't believe this, they're actually teaching school children how to prepare for war. Volkswagen is building tanks again. Yes, tanks. And the German government, seemingly hell-bent on war with Russia, is preparing its citizens to see many dead and injured in the streets. Not even joking about that. That's what they're telling their citizens. In Washington, we're slapping 145% tariffs on Chinese goods, potentially causing the global financial system to completely collapse. None of this is new or should come as a surprise. Our leaders have been marching us in this direction for decades. Joining us now is someone who's been warning about this. Her name is Helga Zepp-LaRoche. She's not a politician. She's not a defense contractor. She doesn't work for Wall Street. She's a German thinker, the founder of the Schiller Institute, and one of the few voices on the planet offering a real alternative, a completely new global architecture based on diplomacy, development, and peace. She believes this current course will end in total collapse unless we change direction and fast. Helga Zepp-LaRoche, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's first talk about the world falling apart. We've got a trade war and potentially a real war. I'm really curious what's going on in Germany. Here, you would think that the Europeans, the minute Trump comes into office and says, I want to come to an agreement, I want to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. My thinking would be Europe would be just, cheerful, joyful, singing hooray, this is good, this has been terrible for the European economy. But instead, the Europeans seem to be going in the opposite direction, hunkering down for more war, wanting war with Russia. What is the deal with Germany wanting a war with Russia for the third time?
Yeah, it is absolutely terrible. But I think what becomes clear now is that, CD Vance just
JD
gave an
Vance
interview to some. Yeah, I just call him Vance. He did an interview to a British media, and he said that the Europeans should stop being vessels of the Americans and take care of their own interest, which is what I have been saying for a very long time. And it is clear that Europeans and Germans in particular, in the recent decades, actually lost all sovereignty and just, groomed an establishment which was really the stakeholders for the Anglosphere. Now, when Trump came in, it became very clear that they were not obeying American orders, but they were obeying orders to an establishment which, you can say is a transatlantic deep state. It's the British, and it was the Biden administration and before Obama and so forth. But, it is not America. I think this is a very important observation people should take note of, that, we are not dealing with countries. We are not dealing with national interest against another nation's interest. But what this particular reaction by Germany and some other Europeans makes clear is that these elites belong to an establishment which is not national. It's supranational. It, I would say, has its power center in Wall Street, in the city of London, and to a certain extent in Frankfurt. And, I think that why they are doing this, trying to keep the war going, they just formed a coalition of the willing, to keep sending weapons to Ukraine, to send money to Ukraine, and they want to continue the war despite the fact. I mean, this is so cynical because it is very clear that the Ukrainians have lost the war. They hardly can keep up the front. They have not the personnel. They have sacrificed, maybe over 1 million people. A whole generation of young people has died for what? For nothing. And these, in my view, absolutely cynical, irresponsible Europeans who want to continue the war, they are, using Ukraine for geopolitical reasons, for reasons which are, I think they have collectively gone crazy. Because, like this guy Merz, who wants to be Chancellor of Germany, he's not yet voted for, he could still lose. He wants to suddenly sent the Taurus missile to Ukraine, which can only be operated with German technicians and basically aids. So that means that, Germany makes itself the target of any Russian counter-reaction. And the Taurus is clearly crossing a red line. So I think, we are looking at a dying empire, but this empire is not linked to nations. I think this is extremely important. It's a supranational oligarchy who is continuing the war despite the fact that it's lost already, because obviously they don't care about German interests. They don't care about the life of Germany, of the existence of Germany, which is at risk with what they do. They only care about the privileges which they gained from being obedient, vassals for a very long time, and now they cannot shed it.
Yeah, it's a very important observation that the United States clearly is not the one driving war. I mean, that's been the assumption for a long time, is that it's been the U.S. and the military-industrial complex inside of the United States that has been egging for war, and then Europe just kind of goes along with it. And like you mentioned, J.D. Vance saying, "Oh, you've got to stop being a vassal of the United States." Well, clearly, now that the U.S. is asking for peace and the rest of the rest of Europe is not even going along with that, you're right. There's something else that is the driving force behind this sort of these conflicts, these wars, the instability. It's not just the United States. And that is such an important point, because it helps us then pinpoint who are the players that are in control. Where are these narratives coming from? What are the agendas, right? Who's benefiting? That's what it always comes down to. Who's benefiting from this? I'm just so surprised that the German people would go along. I mean, are the German people going along with this? Is this the government just speaking and the people are saying, what? We don't want to do this? Or are the German people going along with this idea that, yeah, okay, the U.S. backed out, they've abandoned us, but we've got to keep going forward towards war with Russia?
But my observation is that the German people are divided. You have a large majority of people who feel that no matter what they vote, it doesn't make a difference. We just had this completely failed so-called streetlight coalition, which, was voted out because people hated it. It ruined Germany. It did not protect Germany against the sabotage of Nord Stream 2. It did not keep up the interest, economically. So they voted these people out. Now, what did they vote? They voted the largest party, CDU, the second largest Alternative for Germany, which now is increasing above the CDU. And, a little bit of vote to the Social Democrats and the Greens. Now, the majority came out in such a way that it only would work if the CDU and the Alternative for Germany would go together. That would be a clear majority expressing the will of the people. But because the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is a very mixed bag, they have excellent people in it, but unfortunately, they also have some extreme right-wing people in it. So it makes it very difficult, to work with them. But under these circumstances, to make a firewall whereby the two largest parties, the CDU and the AfD, is that only the other parties, the CDU, the SPD, and in this case, only those two, or alternatively, the Greens, everybody else has been, or the left party, which is not acceptable for these people either. So that basically, no matter what you vote, because of this firewall, you end up with always the same party. So people are extremely frustrated. They vote a government out because they think it completely failed and ruined everything Germany built up after the Second World War, with incredible work and generations of input. These people ruined it, so they are voted out. And what happens? They form again a coalition involving the same people. So there is now a very broad discussion in Germany that democracy is out, because if you criticize a politician, you can end up in jail. I mean, there's the famous example where the Interior Minister, Faeser, somebody put a picture of her in the internet and put a poster on her chest saying, I'm against free opinion, of expression of free opinion. And this person has now a 7 months jail, not implemented right away, but hanging over him as a threat. So, by doing that, they prove that what's on the poster is absolutely true. But that's the situation in Germany. So there is a fear. Everybody is saying you cannot say anymore what you think because you're being prosecuted. And I think we are heading towards an incredible crisis because, nobody understands why it is that these so-called elites, they're not elites, they're mediocre to the hilt. Why are they gambling away the interest of Germany in the way they do? And I think everybody is discussing it quite openly among themselves, that these are establishment figures who only care about their own career, their own privilege, their own income, and they could not care less about the people. And I think there is a complete loss of trust in the government. And, if you think about, what it means if the people lose the confidence in the government, this is very dangerous. This is very bad. And I can only say, fortunately, what is happening in Germany is not the only game in town. Otherwise, I would get quite desperate. And there are many people in Germany who are really desperate. We are having info tables, we are organizing to inform people. And what we encounter from the population is despair. I mean, many people become desperate, cynical, and they say, there's nothing one can do. And that is, in my view, extremely dangerous, because if people think that was the mood in the 30s, this cultural pessimism is what breeds monsters. So that's, unfortunately, I don't have a more optimistic report for you, but that's what I think.
If Germany were to start a war with Russia by using Ukraine, right, and then ultimately getting into this war, which other European countries do you think would follow along with that? And which ones maybe wouldn't?
I think the leader is clearly Great Britain. They have been instigating the war all along. Keir Starmer came to Biden at the end of his administration, egging him on to give the permission to use long-range missiles, give the Ukrainians the permission to do that. And, they're right now the ones who are organizing what they call the coalition of the willing. Now, I find it quite revealing that they would give themselves that name, because if you remember, the coalition of the willing was what did the Iraq war in 2003. Now, in the meantime, Nancy Pelosi, Colonel Wilkerson, and many other officials who were in office at that time have publicly stated that everybody knew that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, that Iraq did not have relations to Al-Qaeda. As a matter of fact, Saddam Hussein put Al-Qaeda in jail, that there was no yellow cake, uranium, that it was all a lie. Mm-hmm. Now, if you count how many people died out of the Iraq war, based on lies, I mean, where is the tribunal which would put these people, in call them for responsibility of what happened? So if they call themselves coalition of the willing, fortunately Germany at that time and France, Schröder and Chirac were not part of that coalition of the willing, but now they call themselves that way, and I think they lack any kind of legitimacy, because I think Trump and Vance have stated repeatedly that they think that it was Ukraine which is responsible for the war. You can actually say that, it was NATO and the 5-time NATO expansion to the east, creating a reversed Cuban Missile situation for Russia. And, in December 21, Putin made an ultimatum to the United States and NATO and said, you must give us legally binding security guarantees, or else, we have to take care of ourselves. And Biden at that time, basically pushed it aside and just they answered some totally irrelevant points. But, it was not unprovoked. You cannot say that in Germany, but it is it is clearly a fact. And the New York Times, they had an article on the 31st of March of 13,000 words. That's a pretty long piece, which was the result of a one-year investigation. They interviewed 300 people from many countries. And the result of that investigation is that the United States was running the war with the command in Wiesbaden in Germany from mid-April 22 onward. Now, if you put all of these things together, if you say that this is an unprovoked war, it's just it's not tenable. And I think the whole world looks at that and they see it, and except these idiotic Europeans, the whole world did not condemn Russia. The whole global South, they said they don't take a side because they saw clearly that this was a lie. So I think, I think this can only lead to an explosion, because you cannot maintain something which is so utterly untrue and think the whole world falls for it when the evidence tells you otherwise.
Yeah. Let's talk about the trade war. What do you think about what Trump is doing, and really how's Europe reacting to this? I mean, Trump is slapping tariffs on everybody, including Europe. Huge tariffs on China. What's the reaction in Europe?
Well, I think the Europeans are caught off guard. I think they are trying to somehow figure out if they should ally more closely with China. That seems to be what they are doing. But, I think that Trump, I cannot claim that I do understand Trump. I think that would be a big order.
None of us do.
But I think if I want to be friendly, I would say he probably wants the right thing. And you could argue, that in order to curb this speculation which goes along with globalization, that is not a bad idea. But what he should have done is he should have said, okay, the world financial system is completely out of balance. We need to correct it. I call a new Bretton Woods conference, and in an orderly and cooperative way, we, look at the principles first, we agree on the principles, and then we sort out the details, and we come out with an agreement which is beneficial for everybody. Everybody in the whole world would have been happy, would have gone along, because everybody knows that this system is out of shape, because the billionaires become more rich and the masses of the people become more poor all over the world, inside countries, but also among countries. But he didn't do it. He chose to use this bullying method of, going like an elephant in the China shop.
Right.
And, in a certain sense, now we are, first of all, some of his billionaire friends were not so happy because they lost some trillions. That's not peanuts, even for them. I think an incredible process has been triggered, which I think is out of control. Because, you see, the problem is that we are not only talking about physical production and who is producing what goods. We are talking about a financial system which is a completely overblown bubble. The US debt is now 37 trillion. But then you have the outstanding derivative markets, which is probably somewhere around 2 quadrillion. Now, that is an incredible thing. I mean, the trade of this derivative market, it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's run by quantum computers using algorithms. It's speculating at the time of nanoseconds on differences in currencies and various values. And the problem is that once you start that it comes down at some point, like losing major sums in certain segments of the market, because of this derivatives on, the derivatives on derivatives on derivatives, it's all extremely interlinked. And once some of these speculators who have not speculated with only their own money, but they have borrowed some money to increase the leverage, and then when they lose, you have margin calls, and these margin calls then lead to a process of unraveling. And I think we are in that domain already. And there are now some lone voices of some super speculators who say that this could lead to a world financial crisis. I think it can lead to a complete blowout of the financial system, much worse than in the 30s and much worse than 2008. And that obviously, if that happens, we are really in an incredible situation, because then you have, just imagine, social upheavals. And then given the military crisis, which we have already, after all, the Ukraine crisis is not settled yet, you have the incredibly dangerous situation in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, the whole situation there. You could have a military reaction to the collapse of the financial system. So I can only say we are in the most dangerous moment I can think of, because it seems that nobody is in control. Nobody seems to be, none of the governments seem to have a clear idea how to deal with that. Maybe, the Chinese probably have the best idea, because Xi Jinping has been talking about, the shared future of humanity. And he has these 3 initiatives: the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and the Global Civilizational Initiative, which altogether are a global approach how to deal with it. But all the other governments, I cannot see that they have a real handling on that.
Yeah. It just reminds me of, it's obviously the West is losing power and is scratching and clawing, trying to maintain that power. But unfortunately, using violence, using force, using tariffs or whatever it is, like bullying tactics, it's not working when you've got China coming around saying, we're just trying to be friends and build partnerships with everybody. And that's what works. That's what nations want to hear. And I wish that we would go in that direction as well. I wish the United States and the West in general would just say, we've got to build partnerships. We've got to make friends. We got to, build up others. And that makes, that would be better and more prosperous for everybody. Instead, we criticize China for doing it. We say, oh, it's a fraud. They're going to own these countries. These countries are going to be in debt. It's going to be terrible. And our response is instead to bomb them, to murder their people. It's just... it's disheartening. I don't know, but a lot of me thinks that there would be the same people who are the elites that are kind of running everything, that want to see these wars. Part of me thinks they want to see a collapse as well, because if they saw an economic collapse, they would say, see, we have to do it our way. You don't get to try something. You don't get to come in here and go rogue and try it your way. You do it our way, and that's the only way.
Well, I think that they are, risking the livelihood of the globe. That's really what we are looking at. If you look at the Chinese, I was a couple of months ago, the last time in China, and, it is so different. Europe right now is a junk heap. We have no infrastructure. We have collapsing bridges. In Germany, bridges are collapsing. Almost every month you have a major bridge. And the United States has potholes in New Jersey. If you go through the highway there, I always tell people, don't ever go with a Fiat 500. It may disappear in a pothole, But in China, there are hundreds of cities, more than many million inhabitants, and these cities are modern. They have high rises. They have incredible rail system. The United States has not 1 meter of fast train. China by now has something like 35,000 miles of fast train. They go almost, I would say, 280 miles an hour. Some of them go even faster than that. They are testing maglev trains, which will go 450 miles an hour, and some even 800 miles an hour being tested. I mean, they're connecting cities with smooth, you go with these trains and you fly through the landscape. You have a glass of water on your table and not one drop would ever jump out. In Germany, you're going with a ICE and you're being bounced back and forth and so forth. I mean, the West, and I mean the United States and Europe, they have neglected to invest in basic infrastructure for decades, for reasons of profit. That infrastructure investment don't make an immediate return, so they just didn't care. China has proceeded the other way around and said that the basic infrastructure is the precondition for any industrial development or the development of agriculture. So they have a absolutely functioning society. I mean, I think if the United States is now trying to have a showdown with China, I'm not so sure who wins, because China is now, according to some technology trackers of some Australian think tank, of 44 leading areas of science and technology, China is leading in 37. If you look at the, China has not just started to give a little bit of counterpunch by blocking the export of rare earth magnets. Now that is used for every single thing produced, motors, cars, everything. I think the Chinese are in a much better position. I mean, if somebody goes to a trade war, it will hurt all sides, obviously. But I think the Chinese have a robust economy. If you compare the physical economy of China and that of the United States, okay, the United States has still a very powerful military-industrial complex, but can people eat rockets? Can they have a menu of drones?
Right.
I don't think so, And the Chinese have a much more sound economy. So I can only hope that Trump is not listening to some of his economic advisors who have advised him, obviously, on this tariff war so far. And he should just call up Xi Jinping. He claims all the time that Xi Jinping is his very good friend. He should act on it. I think he can remedy the situation. Once he would stretch out his hand to the Chinese, everything can be settled. If there is a confrontation, all sides will lose, but I'm quite sure that the West will lose more.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There's definitely, I don't think China's going to back down. I think China realizes at this point in the game that they have the upper hand. And I think they're going to, or at least that they have an even hand and they're going to play it. And I think we're going to see who flinches first, I guess, Trump or China on this one. So you're calling for a conference. You're saying that we've got to get all of the nations back together and have a conference and really talk out our differences and the things that we want, the common challenges that we want to overcome, like hunger, poverty, modern health systems for nation. These are things that you wrote down in your recent article that you published on schillerinstitute.com, which we have the link down below. Trade war, rearmament, world war, or new security architecture. And you wrote in there that we should get together and have this sort of conference, that we should talk things out. I think the critics to you would say, oh, Helga, you're living in an unrealistic world. Russia wants to conquer. Haven't you figured this out? There's been world war between Germany and Russia and Europe and Russia for over and over and over again. Russia wants to conquer. There's no negotiating with these people. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the evidence is that Russia has no intention to conquer even Ukraine. I think they want to have their security taken care of. They don't want to have a offensive NATO or US weapon system on their border. I mean, what would the United States do if China would move offensive rockets to the Mexican border, to the Canadian border? I would want to see the reaction from Washington. And all Russia is doing is reacting to that. The eastward expansion of NATO. I had recently a wonderful interview with Jack Matlock. Jack Matlock was the US ambassador in Moscow at the time of the fall of the wall and the end of the Cold War. And I would really urge people, go to my website and look for that interview with Jack Matlock. He is a senior elder statesman. He speaks the truth. He was there. He can tell you that all the promises were given to James Baker, the State Secretary of State at the time, by Baker to Gorbachev, to Shevardnadze, and they are now in American archives, in the presidential archives, in the National Archive. There are now dozens and dozens of documents which prove that this promise not to expand NATO eastward, if Russia would agree to the German unification, letting Germany be in NATO. Now, I think this was incredibly generous. If you think that at that time, the Second World War was only 40 years over, and for the Russians to be so generous to allow the German unification with Germany being then in NATO, I mean, that I think Germans should be thankful for.
Yeah.
But it seems that the memory of that has been completely eradicated by the mainstream media. And, what Jack Matlock does in that interview, he says, like many other experts, like former General Kujat, who was the highest NATO official and the highest official in the German army, Bundeswehr, who also says, there is absolutely no proof that Russia wants to conquer, not Poland, not the Baltics, and for sure not beyond that. And, I recently had another interview with Ted Postol, who is probably the best expert on nuclear weapons in the world. He's now retired. He was a top MIT professor. He has written many of the top books on the difference between conventional war and nuclear war. And he states also, like all of these others, that, if you look at the size of Russia, they could not first of all, they all say that Russia does not have the intention, but it also does not have the capacity because, Russia has how many citizens? I think somewhere around 140 million. How many does Europe have? More than 500 million.
Mm-hmm.
The United States has a military budget which is 10 times as much as that of Russia. And NATO together with NATO. So it's a complete concoction. There is neither the intention. People say that Putin wants to reconstitute the Tsarist empire. That's just a narrative and not true. And I think, it is about time that people start to stop that kind of a narrative, because that is what it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we could end up in a nuclear war in no time. And if it ever comes to the use of nuclear weapons, it will not stop with one. It will trigger a global nuclear war, and that will be the end of civilization. And I think people should really think about it, because the end of civilization will mean that after such a war, there will not be even a journalist or a historian who could ask, why did this happen? Because we all will be dead. Yeah. And that's what these people are gambling with.
They sure are. They really are. I'm with you. We need to have some sort of a meeting, a peace, a summit, getting nations together rather than bullying and waging war. It would absolutely be much more beneficial. Helga, let's talk about this conference that you guys are putting on. The Schiller Institute is putting on in May. Conference is called A Beautiful Vision for Humanity in Times of Great Turbulence, and I believe this is beginning May 24th. Tell us about this conference.
Well, this will be a physical conference. I think this is important because of COVID-19. We had for a long time only internet conferences, and there's nothing better than to speak with people in person.
Yeah.
So the purpose of this is to pull together people from primarily the United States, but with many international participation, of people who understand that we have to move the world into a completely new paradigm. And what I mean by that is, we must overcome geopolitics. Geopolitics is the idea that one nation or a group of nations has the right to, realize its interest against another nation or another group of nations, even in military ways. That has led 2 times to world war, and this time, it would lead to a catastrophe. And I think, if you look at the longer arc of human history, we have never been so much in one boat like today. In the past, for example, when the Roman Empire collapsed, this happened in Europe, and in India, you had at the same time a Renaissance, the Gupta period. But people didn't even know about it because it would take months and years to travel, and you may not even come back once you travel in one direction. So people just didn't know. This time we are in one boat because of nuclear weapons, because of the internet, because of pandemics, many other factors. So we have to think of, are we the intelligent species or not? Mm-hmm. And if we are, and we are the only intelligent species, at least known so far. I've never met a puppy who would study physics, or a cat who would say, I will have a farm with mice so that I have better breakfast. That doesn't happen. We are the only species who can again and again come up with scientific breakthroughs, increase the living standard of the entire human family if we apply these. So reason is only an attitude of characteristics of humanity. And we must appeal to that reason and say there is a common aim of mankind. And we have to start with that. We have to think the one humanity first, and then put the national interest in affinity, in alignment with that higher idea of the one humanity. And then we can solve any problem, because, you see, I call this the need for a new security and development architecture, because the development is the key. Because rather than fighting over, who produces what and make tariffs and who in the other guy in a zero-sum game, let's make the pie bigger. Let's just produce enough that everybody has enough. And, I think the Global South at this point is determined that they will shed 500 years of colonialism. They don't want to be any more raw material producers and exporters. The countries of the Global South want to have a decent life for their citizens as well. That does not enter the calculation sometimes of people in the United States or in Europe, but the countries of Africa, of Asia, and Latin America, they are on the move. And, I think the West, because of a certain arrogance, has completely missed out on the dramatic changes which have taken place, which is reflected, for example, in the BRICS. This is, the BRICS countries are now 22 countries of the Global South, and about 40 have applied for membership. So rather than saying, this is the enemy, and I think Trump has made some remarks in this direction, that if these countries dare to make their own currency, there will be 100% tariff war. He's make already 145% to China, so 100% looks like peanuts. Anyway, I'm joking. No, but rather than looking at these countries as enemies, I know and I can guarantee to anybody that if the United States and if European nations would go to Jakarta, to Rio, to Brasilia, to other capitals, New Delhi, Beijing, and say, we want to cooperate. We have so many problems we have to take care of together. Why don't we find out a way of solving it together? There would be 100% open arms. People would be happy. And actually, I think it would be relatively easy to solve all problems if such an approach would be taken. And if the United States would say, and I think there are some signs in that direction, even Marco Rubio said, the reality is we are in a multipolar world. And, I think that if Trump succeeds to end the war in Ukraine with Putin, and if he can avoid, getting into a real conflict with China, which is unfortunately on the way right now. But if, let's say, the three countries, the US, Russia, and China, would work together and then cooperate with India and Indonesia and Brazil, these are major countries, it would be a piece of cake to solve all problems of the world. And the conference, we are working towards having such a real international security and development architecture conference, which could do exactly what the Peace of Westphalia did, which ended 150 years of religious war in Europe. And the reason why people got together at that time was because they realized if they would keep fighting, everybody would be dead, because at that point already 1/3 of all people had died. 1/3 of all animals, cattle was dead, villages were destroyed. So then they met, in Münster and Osnabrück, and for 4 years they negotiated. First, they agreed on principles. The first principle being, if you want to have peace, you must take into account the interest of the other. And I think this is an extremely important message, because if you don't do that, then any peace agreement is just a prelude to the next war. I mean, the best example of that is the Versailles Treaty at the end of the First World War, because it was unjust. It did not take into account the interests of Germany or China. And therefore, it was just the interregnum until the Second World War. So I think that what must occur, and it could occur in the context of the UN General Assembly, it could take case as a project of the BRICS, but organize a conference where the heads of state meet and agree that the world needs to be moved to a safer place, and then have the experts, discuss the details. But if the governments agree on the principles, like what are the common interests of mankind, and if there's an agreement on that, then the experts and, trained diplomats can work out the details in terms of military, economics, other issues. But I think such a conference is more urgent than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one big topic at that conference.
Okay. Well, we do have the link down below to the conference. It is a beautiful vision for humanity in times of great turbulence. Beginning Saturday, May 24th is the beginning of the conference. But of course, sign up in advance because you can, you go to this in person. It's in the New York area. Also, the Schiller Institute has an international peace coalition that meets every Friday, which people are welcome to join, and we've got the link for that as well. Helga Zepp-LaRoche, it's always a pleasure talking to you and hearing solutions. We just got a lot of, there's a lot of us pull our hair out over what's going on, and I just love that you're always coming up with solutions like this is how we fix it. And I just hope that more and more people listen to you, and more people start to say, yeah, that's what we've got to do. We need this type of leadership, solution-based leadership, instead of this warmongering and bullying leadership that's marching us towards absolute disaster. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. We do have the links down below for all of that. So Helga, thank you so much.
Well, let me just add one aspect. Sure. It would be quite easy to stop this trade war danger of disintegration of the financial system. What President Trump should do is what Roosevelt did in 1933, who implemented Glass-Steagall. That is a very proven, well-functioning legislation. You protect the commercial banks, you cut out the speculation, and then you move to a couple of other steps. You bring back the power of credit generation to under the sovereign control of the government. And you do that in many countries, preferably all countries at the same time. And that way you can create a new credit system, and you issue new credit for production. And, that way you could accomplish what Trump is intending to do. But obviously, his advisors are really monetarists. And, the beautiful thing is that person who just won the election in Romania as a president a couple of months ago, who was then kicked out, basically by courts declaring him not president. Then when he applied again to be president, the courts again nixed his participation. He just made an unbelievable interview, which I think is very important for Americans to know. He said that the reason why they went after him is because he wanted to implement Hamiltonian economics in Romania. Alexander Hamilton, the inventor of the American system of economy. And he said that is the best economic system there is. And the reason is globalists wanted to prevent this from happening. Now, that is something for President Trump to look into, because Vance, when he appeared in the Munich Security Conference, he already referred to the Romanian example as, that democracy is in bad shape in Europe. So now the Romanian almost president refers to the American system of economy. And that's the debate we need. And I would actually, invite your listeners to contact us in the Schiller Institute, because, we have to have a debate about real economics, not voodoo economics, not monetarism, not speculative gains, but how do you actually organize physical economy on sound principles? And that is why I just wanted to bring in this question that the Romanian almost president is now campaigning for the American system of economy. I think that's definitely something which should inspire Americans, to get involved in such a debate. So contact the Schiller Institute and have fun with us remedying this present incredible crisis of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, great with solutions, Helga. Thank you so much again for being here. We do have the link down below. Definitely encourage everybody to get involved. That's how we're going to make change, is if we're passive and we don't do anything, then they'll just keep doing what they're doing. But if we actually start speaking up, if we actually start organizing, then that is when they have to actually start listening to the people. So that is what the Schiller Institute is all about. Helga Zepp-LaRoche, thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be invited by you, because you are an honest journalist, and that's rare.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.